What time is it? It's story time. That's right. Today I'm going to be reading a short story, maybe you could call it flash fiction, but a small story that I wrote over the past couple weeks. So, let's get into the video. Dr. Gizra piloted his ship into the atmosphere. Zavis 5 was a sea planet. From orbit, the multitude of small archipelagos that made up its only land were practically invisible. Gizra hit a few chords into his navigation computer, then put his ship on autopilot and slid his suspensor chair out of the cockpit and into the laboratory in the back of the ship. He pulled a book out from a small shelf and leafed through its ancient pages. Turning to a computer terminal, the man slammed away at the keyboard, compiling the information he would need when he got to his destination. Dr. Esmond Gizra was an independent archaeologist who specialized in artifacts from the era of dust. He had come to this planet in search of an ancient item steeped in legends and tragedy. It had taken him so long to find this place, to find its location, it seemed unreal that he was actually here. Gizra felt the rocket slowing his ship down as it came to land on the islands, and he slid back into the cockpit, taking the controls. The surface of the island was covered in rough, rocky terrain. The doctor peered through his spectacles and spotted a place that looked flat enough to land. It was a bumpy landing, but he managed to set the ship down. Gizra got out of his chair and stepped out into the hall, his hand feeling the reassuring weight of his energy gun in its holster on his belt, as the doors swung open and the ramp rolled down. Esmond Gizra walked down the ramp, breathing in the salty sea air of Zavis 5. A light wind rustled the coarse grasses that grew on the rocky surface of the island, and a few gulls soared overhead. The doctor pulled out his computer, a pyramid-shaped device that lit up with multiple displays in the palm of his hand. He scanned the readouts and looked up at the terrain, trying to determine which way he should go. He picked his way down the rocky slope, being careful not to fall. From up on the hill, the distance he had to cover had seemed irrelevant, but the terrain was rife with huge boulders and dangerous cracks, a maze to get through on foot. It took nearly an hour for Gizra to get down the first hill. He then stood at the banks of a channel running between two islands. The brine flowed slowly through the gap. The doctor slung off his pack and pulled out a large cylinder. He tapped a couple buttons on the side, and it expanded slowly into a small dinghy. As the boat shaped up, Gizra paced back and forth along the shore. He stumbled upon a small dock, no doubt built many decades ago, as this part of the planet was uninhabited as far as he knew. He reached down and cut a sample from the wood stowing in his bag. Dr. Gizra rowed the small boat across the channel, aiming for the far side. He left the boat on the shore, knowing he would need it later, and continued through the difficult terrain towards a cliff in the center of the second island. By the time the doctor arrived at his destination, sweat was rolling down his face, and his lips were cracked from the wind and the sea air. Before him rose a wind-worn cliff face, jutting abruptly out of the ground. Gizra lit up his computer, sweeping the rock. A small opening in the cliff lay close to the ground, near the middle. The doctor strode towards it. The sagging cave entrance was flanked by two small pillars, carved with ancient symbols and hieroglyphs. He swept his computer over the images, scanning them for later study. Gizra unhooked a torch from his belt and hit the switch. Bright magnesium flames flared at the mouth of the metal tube. He was about to enter the cave when a noise that was more than the hissing of the torch caught his ear. Gizra turned slowly around, his hand straying to the gun at his belt. Sure enough, in the sky above the islands, the bright sun glinted off the metal wings of a craft. The doctor pulled out his scope and zoomed in on the ship. Emblazoned on the wing was a curling dragon, wreathed in flames. Damn, he muttered. How had they gotten here so quickly? Were they tracking him? Were they searching for the sword? Whatever the reason, he couldn't let them get to it first. He cut the power to his torch and scuttled backwards into the dark cave. Once he had gone far enough away from the entrance to avoid being spotted by the drakes, he reignited the torch, peering around at his surroundings. He stood in a hallway, the rock ceiling sagging uncomfortably. The walls were covered with more pictograms and paintings, which the doctor captured with his computer. Nothing else appeared to be of interest, so he continued down the hall. His footsteps on the tiled floor echoed around the claustrophobic cavern. After going a ways, the hallway opened up into a larger natural cavern. A thin stone bridge arced across the gap where the floor fell away into the darkness below. The light of the doctor's torch could barely penetrate the thick shadows. He gritted his teeth, not wanting to think of the fall that lay a couple feet to either side. The bridge was maybe 100 feet long, stretching to another hallway at the far side. Esmond sat down against the wall, taking a couple gulps of water from his canteen and studying the pictures of the wall paintings that he had saved in his computer. He recognized some of the characters, but it wasn't a language or a culture that he knew of. He thought back to the Drake ship that had landed outside, and he pulled his gun out of its holster, laying it on the tiled floor next to where he sat. After a few moments of rest, he got to his feet and continued downwards. After a bit more walking, the tunnel began to level out and widen. To the sides there were a few alcoves in which stood dusty suits of armor. Gizra's eyes lit up when he saw these artifacts. He stepped towards one of the suits. The plated body, the angular helmet, an amazing specimen of this unknown people. He ran his weathered hand along the cold, dusty metal. As he did so, the arm of the suit shifted slightly. Then it shifted some more. Gizra stepped back slowly. Then the arm of the armor shot out suddenly. The gauntlet slammed into the doctor's chest with a sickening crunch. Gizra stumbled back, coughing and wheezing in pain. The doctor clutched his ribs, which throbbed with pain. His other hand reached for the handle of his weapon, pulling it out with shaking fingers. The trigger was pulled, and a searing arc of crackling energy shot through the hallway towards the attacker, supplementing the light of the fallen torch. The animated armor was hit in the chest by the bolt of energy, which coursed along its surface, throwing sparks into the air. The thing jerked a couple of times, trying to move towards Gizra, then fell, smashing and revealing circuits inside. Gizra scrambled back, recharging his weapons as the three other sets of armor began to clank slowly towards him. He let off another blast with his pistol, and another foe went down, but the other two picked up their speed, coming towards him. A metal foot slammed down on the torch, smashing it and extinguishing the flames. With no light but the sinister glow coming from these disguised bots, Gizra desperately fumbled to reload his gun. One of the bots had reached him, flinging a long-bladed spear, barely missing him, and sending a spray of mosaic tiles from the floor flying. The doctor kicked out at the thing's leg, doing nothing but stubbing his toe, then let off another blast from his gun. This arc caused the bot to explode in a wave of fire, washing heat over Gizra. But as he turned, the final foe was upon him. A metal fist shot out, slamming into his upper arm, smashing the flimsy appendage like a toothpick. The doctor let out a cry, stumbling away from the ruthless attacker, his good arm holding his gun in a shaking hand. The fist swung again, whistling past his head, then another blast arced from the gun, ending the fight. Gizra slumped against the cold stone wall of the hallway, his two injuries burning with pain. With his arm that lay intact, he fumbled in his pack, his hands closing around a med pack, which he slammed into the broken arm. It hurt like 1,000 fires, but it seemed to be working. After a few moments to catch his breath, he got shakily to his feet and continued down the hallway. It opened up into a large chamber, ancient stone pillars lining the walls, shafts of sunlight trickling down from somewhere high in the vaulted cavern, illuminating a single pedestal in the center of the cave, on which lay a gleaming sword. After all this searching, murmured Gizra, his hand reaching out towards the blade. He stepped carefully towards the pedestal. When he reached it, he pulled a ragged bit of old cloth from his pack. Reaching forward, he wrapped the fabric around the artifact. Even through the material, he could feel the hum of the ancient blade, an item steeped in stories and blood. Gizra's mind flashed through the limitless possibilities of study and knowledge that could come from this one weapon, his thoughts wandering far into the future. Then, suddenly and unexpectedly, the sound of a voice jerked him back into the present. "I think you'll find we'll be taking that, Doctor." Gizra whirled around to face the intruders. A man in a long robe stood next to a trooper in full armor who had a rifle in his hand. Drake's. The doctor faltered and attempted to reach for his gun. Don't try anything like that," warned the robed man, drawing a pistol of his own. "Bring us the sword, Doctor." There was no choice. Gizra could fight, but they outmanned him and outgunned him, and he had never been a spectacular shooter. He could try to run, but he would get shot down quickly, and the only way out was past the drakes. His heart protested, but he stepped forward and slid the wrapped sword over to the leader of the duo of drakes. "Excellent," the man said, smiling. "Now come with us, Doctor. We have plans for you." At a hand gesture from his leader, the trooper stepped forward and roughly yanked the weapon from Esmond's belt. Then, the trio began making their way back out of the caves. Gizra racked his brain as they walked, looking around at his surroundings and in his mind for something, some way that he could get an advantage and escape. They walked past the smoking bots, over the rickety bridge, and through the marvelously painted hallways. Out into the open air again, they trekked through the maze of rocks and brambles, the trooper walking behind Esmond, the rifle aimed at his back. Gulls called in the windy skies above, and the waves crashed against the shores of the island. There was nothing Gizra could do but comply and walk along. They crossed the channel in 2 boats, and soon they were back on top of the hill where the ships were parked. "Say goodbye to your vessel, Gizra," grinned the man. "You'll be coming with us." "I don't see why that's necessary," stalled the doctor, slipping his hand into his pocket, searching. "You already have the sword." "You know too much, Doctor," triumphed the drake. "You're right, I do know too much," affirmed the doctor. His hand clicked on the button in the remote he held in his hand. Huge billows of steam began to issue from his clunky old ship, engulfing the hill. Gizra dove to the ground as a blast arced from the trooper's gun. The doctor pulled at his knife and stabbed out at the armored foe. A groan sounded from the midst of the cloud. Gizra reached out, wrenching the weapon from the drake's grasp. He could hear the other one running towards their ship. Gizra took a shot aimlessly, then rushed in pursuit. He must have the sword. He could hear the hiss of the hatch on the drake's ship opening. In desperation, Gizra hurled the heavy metal rifle. It met its mark with a thunk, and Gizra moved forward to reclaim the sword. Once the cloth-wrapped package was safely in his grasp, the doctor moved quickly into his ship before the dazed drakes could react and recover. With the click of a lever, the slamming of a button, and the yank of a throttle, the engines roared into life, and Dr. Gizra soared up, out of the atmosphere of Zavis 5. There would be pursuit. He knew it to be true, but he had the blade.